All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for coming to our discussion group. So I'm Cain, and I'm also going to let the rest of my colleagues introduce themselves.
I'm Sonia. I'm Soraya.
And Ochoa². And Trinklein².
And Lina Mikaliunaite², she's still upstairs probably in the poster session, but when she comes down, you'll get to meet her as well. But we're all PhD and one postdoc studying comprehensive two-dimensional chromatography. And really what we wanted to get at with this discussion group was how can we remove the barriers from adopting 2D chromatography in future academic fields and also in industry. So to take you kind of through the outline of our discussion group, we're first going to talk about some preliminary considerations that you need when doing 2D GC or 2D LC. Then we're going to start trying to address some of those barriers that are commonly seen with instrumentation and hardware, then moving on to method development, and then ultimately data processing. And then we'll kind of wrap up this discussion group with some final thoughts. Since this is a discussion group, we wanted to make this actually interactive. And so therefore, there's going to be two ways that you can participate. The first way is going to be through the WooClap platform. And so therefore, if you have a cellular device on you right now, you can take it out, scan the QR code up here, and put in the event code, and you'll be able to answer questions and take polls throughout the app. And if that's the way that you feel best to communicate your thoughts on how we can help remove some of these barriers to 2D chromatography, that's great. The second method to participating in our discussion group is you can actually just raise your hand and we'll come around with a mic and hopefully try to start some conversations that way as well. If you don't have the QR code right here, all the following slides, there should be the actual website URL and the event code that you can go on and plug everything into. Is the WooClap working for everyone? No? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So as you guys continue to do that, we're going to go ahead and kind of open it up to our first poll, which is basically just how do you classify yourself? This should be a pretty easy question just to kind of get a gauge of the audience of who mainly we're all working with. So for example, like I said, all of us up here, we are currently PhD students or a postdoctoral researcher, so that's kind of what we're familiar with in working. But we'd also love to hear other perspectives from staff scientists and professors, those that are in government or also in industry. Is it open on the phones? Sorry?
Oh, it's a different question.
Oh.
It's not the wrong question.
Okay, yeah.
Is that the next question? Oh, yeah. We tried clicking.
Still the second question, the other question.
Go to that slide to show their answer.
Okay. It's fine. Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to just skip right along. A little minor technical difficulty that's going to, of course, happen. Okay, so the better question, and probably the more relevant one, is what type of instrumentation do you guys mainly work with? try to get a feel for the room. How many liquid chromatographers do we have versus GC chromatographers? And it's overwhelmingly GCGC. Also, it's also pretty interesting. We have one person who's done that works with heart cutting. Do you mind raising your hand? Yeah, do I? All right, well, so we're going to kind of mainly focus on the comprehensive side instead of the hard cutting side for GC and LC as we move through this presentation. And, oh, that's fun. That's fine. All right, we're just going to skip ahead. So first, we want to kind of go over some preliminary considerations in trying to figure out whether comprehensive two-dimensional chromatography is right for you. And so just for basic definitions, what are the three guiding principles behind comprehensive 2D separations? Is that every part of the sample must be subjected to two independent separations, and that equal percentages of all those sample components must pass through both columns and eventually reach the detector, and that the separation, ideally on the first dimension, should be maintained. And so some of the really founding papers behind comprehensive two-dimensional chromatography, first for the LC world, was the Ernie and Fry paper in 1978. And then later on, Bushy and Jorgensen really proved upon that separation in 1990 and actually getting it into a reasonable LC separation runtime. On the GCGC side of things, we also had Louis and Phillips in 1991. So this kind of shows that GCGC and LC are still relatively new techniques that really, you know, since these papers have only been around for the past 40 years, 30 years right now, it's still relatively new, and maybe that's also why it's not as adopted in industry and academia. And then so just to kind of clarify the difference between comprehensive two-dimensional chromatography from heart cutting, you can usually figure just in the first dimension is going to be the top row, and then the second dimension is the bottom row. In single heart cutting, you're selecting a fraction from your first dimension column, and then that's just going to undergo that second dimension separation. In multiple heart cuttings, you can imagine you select multiple fractions from that 1D separation to undergo a 2D separation. And then there's also selective comprehensive chromatography, which I know Dwight has worked a lot on, where you're actually, instead of taking just a whole fraction and doing an entire 2D separation under that, you're taking just that fraction and then you're splitting it up into smaller bits to be able to do smaller second dimension separations. And then lastly, we do have full comprehensive chromatography, which is what our discussion group's mainly going to focus on. And that's where, again, every single part of that first dimension separation is being fully sampled and separated on the second dimension. And this is fine. Okay. And it just wants to go straight to.
Oh, you have to like.
Oh, I hope I click on the right screen. I'm learning. Okay. So, what makes comprehensive 2D chromatography more complex than those other modes of? All right. Change of plans. We're just going to open this up to an entire discussion and try to maybe avoid the woo clap from not working with us. So does someone want to try to take a stab at trying to explain why they think comprehensive 2D chromatography might be more complex than some other modes like heart cutting? And we'll bring the mic to you.
My voice being the question of like speaking about GCxGC, I'm wondering if it's still true. When I did the development of instrumentation for comprehensive GC, And the lack of development of GC data, I have the feeling that if I want to buy a system, I would find like more like user-friendly instrumentation that will be comprehensive than marketing. But that is only my comprehensive user point of view.
Yeah, maybe I know that hard cutting might be more familiar for the LC crowd. So is there a reason why maybe the LC might be a little bit more? Do you have a?
Yeah, I can maybe give my personal opinion. I think that maybe it's the fact that in online comprehensive to DLC, the fraction collection from the first dimension and the reinjection into the second dimension is a continuous process. So this kind of imposes a severe restriction. Is directly linked to the second dimension cycle time, and this can cause, I don't want to say problems, but difficulties when you develop your methods. That for me is the main difficulty compared to hard cutting or selective comprehensive, where you can basically have your first dimension separation. If you want, you don't even have to adapt it. You could take a hard cut or selectively cut it and then send it to another column quite easily. Whereas in full comprehensive, when you're online, you cannot do that. It's not possible. I don't know about GC, but for LC, I would say that's like the main thing that would make full comprehensive more difficult in a way than hard cutting or multiple hard cutting or even selective comprehensive.
Yeah, I think thinking as, you know, a full comprehensive GCGC person, the software and like the instrumentation, the hardware, like Paige said, it's already kind of set up there for you to do full comprehensive GCGC, but it's very interesting that like the instrumentation, the software is just sometimes not quite there for LC. Or
well, the software and instrumentation is there, but it's just if you compare it to hard cutting, I just mean that the method development is a bit more complex because of this interconnection between sampling time and cycle time. But no, we have like very robust instrumentation right now. It's not an hardware or software problem, I think.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Does anyone else have any?
My experience is more in petroleum.
Okay.
And I think hard cutting GC, we doing it for the last 30, 40 years. GC times GC, when we put up an image or chromatograph, everybody says, what we want, yes. So we are used in petroleum, we are definitely used to just a chromatography. And even if you have performed switching systems, as long as you explain it, it's one chromatography, one separation. It's fine, but I think 2D GC will come out. Due to the new fields will require more separation power. So people just have to get used to understanding like the 2D blocks.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And we'll actually touch on at the end with data visualization and processing how we can maybe help improve the interpretation of a 2D chromatogram for industry perspectives. So moving on to our next question. So how do you typically know when you need to use a comprehensive 2D chromatography? When is it the most helpful for your separations, but over just doing like a simple 1D separation?
This one. Couple of years, 10 years ago, we already decided that every group sample that comes into our laboratory, at least for gas chromatography, will first be about comprehensive GCGC. because that gives us the highest resolution. And then we can immediately see, is this sample so simple that we can go to either a one-dimensional GC or that we really need comprehensive? So I would say, when do I know? The question is just one-dimensional GCGC, and that will tell you what to do, whether you have to stay there or go to a simple machine. So actually, strategy really works for GCGC.
Yeah. And James as well?
I almost agree with Franz, I have an example of why, for us, especially if it's an unknown sample we've never touched before, our first run is on a GCF ID, just to make sure we don't kill everything, or if we do kill things, we're killing something that's easy to fix and or replace. And then it goes on where ran some stuff with some colleagues that happen to have some kind of precursor or some kind of polymer, I don't know what the hell was in there. Some proprietary mixed stabilizers for biomolecules, and it coated, it destroyed the column, coated the slitless injector and all kinds of crap, coated the jet for the FID and collectors and the FID and white plastic stuff. So I'd say the first run is on an instrument that you don't care if you trash it, and then it goes on the GC system.
Do you have any, Soraya, any thoughts for the LC?
Well, how do I go with to use comprehensive 2D? I mean, maybe the question is more for the LC side. How do I know when to use comprehensive 2D over hard cutting or selective or other modes? And I guess that depends on the sample complexity mostly. The question that you need answer for, and also maybe the analytical goal that you have. If you only want to separate a few coevolutive peaks, then you can go with hard cutting or multiple hard cutting or even selective comprehensive if the matrix is not that complex. But if you want a comprehensive view of your sample and entire picture and you want to resolve as much peak as possible, then yes, you need to go for full comprehensive. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts on maybe, say for example, even if you have a sample and you want to fully characterize it, but you don't know what's in there, you don't really want to, you don't have a whole lot of time to invest into method development to trying to get the best resolution out of stuff. Why wouldn't you just try just 1D just to see anything in there? Does anyone have any thoughts on trying to maybe best way, you know, doing something quick with just a 1D method versus trying to develop a 2D method to fully characterize that sample?
Slightly back to the comments of again, because if I have only one sample that I need to inject only once to like see what's happening, and it's not something that I will run every day in my lab, I will still go for the GCxGC because I will see everything in one runtime, even if it's only like 5 peaks, and I know the answer that I'm looking for. And even if it's not optimized and I use like 30 minutes to like separate 5 compounds, it's still only like 30 minutes of my time. If I have to like run it in GC, I will see 5 peaks and I will see, I don't know, like 2 are not correlating there. So I will like for a quick 1, 2D is still the best approach. After, if I have to run like 1000 analysis of these 5 compounds, I will move to a fast GC 1D run.
Yeah, okay, so kind of keeping all that into thought, you know, we're all 2D chromatographers, so of course, you know, we're all also going to say just run it in 2D. Let's kind of try to talk about why some labs that maybe just focus only on 1D or hard cutting is trying to see is the barriers to adopting comprehensive 2D chromatography really with the instrumentation and the hardware side of things. So I guess the first question is, you know, we have really great, robust commercial GCGC and LC instruments, but does your lab still try to primarily work with those commercial instruments that are pretty robust, or has anyone had any experience with trying to retrofit or make an in-house GCGC or LC instrument? Does everybody primarily just work with commercial instruments?
So I'm now working only with commercial sector, but I have experience to make my own GCGC both with the Trinklein modulator, lab and flow modulator lab. And I have to say that I think it's a great experience to start with the technique because it's a real way to understand what is happening there. And also, my systems were rather robust. I didn't move from the lab-made one to the commercial one because they were not working, but just because I moved away from the lab.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of thinking, you know, maybe some of the barriers might be that people don't have the funding to get straight to a GCGC instrument. And so therefore, if anyone had maybe some experience with trying to retrofit a 1D system to a 2D system, that would be really interesting to hear about right now. And maybe how that not only was a great learning experience to figure out how the technique worked, but also could provide some insight into whether or not, you know, is that like an easier way to get people into doing 2D chromatography? Yeah, Bob?
So, I mean, I don't know about GCGC, but I think for 2DLC it's for sure true that the fact that you just can get another pump that you probably are buying around somewhere and take it off. You're in business. If you can control the system, of course, like that's the other thing. So yeah. I think most of the other people that have come to DLC know how it is to program 300 rules about energy gains, like you have to manage and program yourself, which you retrofit, right? But I think other than that, it's really a nice way, cheap, economic way. It's also for a company who often want business cases, right, to get into the DLC field. So yeah, for sure. And especially as a university, of course, we also have to sometimes retrofit systems. But,
yeah, PH.
Based on both comments, like I wonder, like how much like freedom people working in the R&D industry have to like retrofit an instrument and really like modify the commercial system to do like some what I would call like missing on one with those systems. Like because yeah, at the university basically it's your break, it's your problem, but I guess it's the industry that might be like a bit more complicated to be able to do this type of modification.
I guess that's true, but I think at least for 2DLC, you of course just connect the one column to above and then above to a second dimension column. So I mean, usually in industry, I would say they start to worry more if you have to drill a hole in your system, right? But I think for 2DLC, at least it's not too scary for them. I think. Yeah, but even then, I think so. That's like also citing back a little bit to the previous point. Where I see totally why you would, for example, go for 2DGC, but for 2DLC, I mean, we have the luxury of having a huge toolkit. So, right, it's not like the buffer space separation will answer the question, should I use 2D or 1D? Right, there's all these different pictures you can do with all these different solvents, and they will all give a different answer. So, I have heard people talking about developing standardized 3LC methods, like I want a reconstruction, a exchange method, something like this, something like that, and then I have every bit of method, but I don't think it will work like this at all. Because there's just so many options in processing. The moment I can show one set, I don't do Rossi because it's too difficult for me, so I just stick with GC. By the way, that is not it's yours, not mine. If you prefer to look in terms of options that you have.
Just to add that my experience working with folks in industries, not so much that they don't have the freedom, but they made something homemade. It's not a supported solution. So if they build something and then they call admin and say, why is my thing not working? And they're like, we have no idea because you did this to yourself. So there seems to be I think I understand a very strong driving force to use supportive solutions. So for us, I think we still very much have our instruments that are sandboxed, to use James' term. But anything that we do that we think is sort of ready for prime time, we really want people to adopt, and we absolutely use it on something that they can buy out of the catalog. Because otherwise, I think it does pretty severe.
Oh, I can also.
So, like, based on both of your comments, like, for SCs, based on the larger number of combinations, like there is a bigger industry for like joint solutions. Think, okay, if you are targeting this molecule in this matrices, like you use this combination with like combination of gradients, and this will give you the answers that you need. And this is like one or two like methods that they will use on the system just to get like a specific question answer.
Yes, so actually, I think the commercial support is really crucial here because we have this database actually known for 2LC methods, so we still maintain it, even though it's not up to date right now. But basically, what you really see is that when I think it was Boris and Nixon came with their commercial 2DLC systems, not so that you really see also the publications and methods like really going on. So we like earlier it was mentioned there was this this noise pattern where nothing would really happen. And so, for example, we developed some methods with polymers in the early 2000s. Nothing really happened. Then, manufacturers came with their dedicated systems. And then suddenly the industry started to get interested. I still see, at least in the Netherlands, that many interns use the systems because the method development is still too costly for 3DLC. But it definitely has made a huge change that companies have started to support this, like manufacturers. This is the cycle, like what Ryan also said.
I would say that this is why you hear us talking about method development. Is there's, in a way, like I think you're saying, there's like too many choices. So the user, the normal user, let's say, who doesn't have a lot of experience, wants some assistance with narrowing the number of possibilities, and then you can deal with the mobile players and so on. I think what we're seeing is that we're to provide some tools to make it more efficient, because right now it's still scary to people.
Yeah, and I like for me it's really interesting to have this opinion, because like it's a question that we have been asking in GCxGC for a long time. So when I started in GCxGC like 10 years ago, like there was a lot of people trying to like crazy color combination and create this, and like I did it too, like most of the time it's like major failure, but sometimes they are very interesting selectivity. But when you see like papers coming out about like metabolomics or proteomics, they are kind of coming back to like the basic combination of normal combination with like polar, non-polar, bipolar, and polar, non-polar color for any type of application code. I would say it's good enough and it's robust enough to do that. So I think after like trying a lot of things, like no game, like okay, let's start with that, and that's not working. Like we may like find another solution. So I think that's why it's interesting to see like on the other side like, the need of development, because we cannot like, because Bob said that oh, I will use this combination for like 98% of the benefits.
We keep picking up knowing innovation. So yeah, I think it's interesting. So we done a review paper actually where it's what you see in our second dimension. By far, the most commonly used the separation type is reverse plates, and very often they're using something like CHE, just plain vanilla state phase for us. And I think it is exactly like you say, it's good enough for most situations. So I mean, even though we've tried, we live in work at Carlisle University like this. Yeah, we try all kinds of crazy things. Sometimes they're really useful, but usually not. And so yeah, it's just good enough, and we know how to use it. So I think there's a lot of parallels.
Het is een comment, geen comment, correct? Uit supported application. I'm actually from a company who sells applications and support applications. And I think one of the reasons why we're successful is that we guarantee that one lab in the US and one lab in China and Africa can do the same analysis. The deployment should be global, so they really want to have standardized input. That's the thing, we saw it happening the same way. And then they prefer not to do their own research. But not so much easy terms. That's how it started, but we do more column switching or hard copy.
If you want to say, you have a whole section on the development state, so.
But stay on the top of the not one column set and running with that, or maybe a couple column sets and try to both. We run all kinds of different types of samples for all different kinds of things. But if you've got the same column set in there, the same basic method, the same compound is going to show up in the same spot. So when you're running unknowns, you finally figure, okay, here's this compound that I've identified as it is. Well, now when it happens to come up again in some other creative sample, you know what it is, right? And it's in that spot. And if you're always changing your methods, your molecules start moving around. You may not know what you lose track of what these molecules are. So that's one of the other advantages to just having a method that is good enough. I mean, I could probably have a student spend a couple of weeks squeezing out a teeny bit more performance for their particular set of samples, but it's usually not worth it.
So I work, I guess, for context, working with that is an industry, so we're doing tech kind of stuff. And what we did to bring GCxGC in was first develop our own in-house kind of fixed modulator kind of thing, and then we combine it commercially, so we can justifiably prove that this would actually be useful for us. And I think like what was good about purchasing commercially was that now we have vendor support. And when demand came high on things like getting results out quickly or something failing, then we can also go to the vendors and actually give us a lot of support. So I think like that's why it was good for us to develop something to justify, but then we went the commercial route to really use it heavily now.
Yes, I think there's a really great discussion and really kind of highlights, both the need for having both in-house developed comprehensive methods and instrumentation, but also the commercial side as well. So kind of continuing along the idea of retrofitting. So for those that, as a community, should we try to focus on demonstrating how old 1D instruments could potentially be retrofitted for comprehensive 2D chromatography and able to, say, convince bosses in industry? Or is that just not practical for certain applications or industries? Yeah.
So we in our lab retrofitted our quad just with the diaphragm valve modulator. Once one of our Pegasus died, just to have another mass spectrometer, because obviously, like, we don't want to do the experimental instrumental work with the nice BT instrument. We do keep that for like big data collections. And I think, like, I enjoy retrofitting the quad. I think it shows for more of the undergrad labs that if you do have a quad, you can do 2D GC. It's not that complicated. It is not that expensive. And it doesn't have to be thousands and thousands of dollars. Nice GCxGC instrument.
We also went through a similar process in my where we purchased a GCMS with a quad, and then later bought a commercial modulator to put on it. So the entire package is commercial, but supported through 2 different vendors. And I would say one of the bigger challenges, I think, is when we do like our annual preventative maintenance and they come out and they see like the parameters we're using on the 1D GC company side. It's difficult for them because they're like, you're doing what?
Yeah.
Like, you're using what SKU? And it's always kind of the process of every time we need support of explaining exactly what we're doing. So that's been interesting to kind of navigate. But really the reason that we did it that way was because a lot of the applications we're working in are forensic in nature, and quadruples are really common in forensic laboratories. There's not a lot of talk in the industry. And so we wanted to be able to show that, you know, you can purchase a commercial modulator and put it on a pre-existing instrument. And yeah, I'm sure for certain industries that's not applicable, but I think in some areas it could be really useful.
And I think kind of going along that, just knowing about the forensics community, you also have to be able to prove in court, you know, and court's used to just the 1D GC side. So trying to then show like, oh, you can retrofit the 1D GC to do 2D GC, you get so much more information. I'm sure that's pretty important as well.
Yeah, it's definitely not being used really in the actual court systems right now. But hopefully in the future that could change. And I think like the idea of retrofitting an existing instrument is interesting, but when you can do it with commercial options, right? Not necessarily just making something in hex, then that also provides like some validity in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, well, I can totally agree with this. Also on the GCxGC side, I think we're really for LC. So I think honestly, from what we see with the interaction with partners, with the industry as such, is more that they are more convinced by the information that you can offer them with the 2D side. So, and then I think the other thing that we really should use now, especially in this day and age. So for example, Lightspeed, they made a 2D simulator, and they can predict 2D chromatograms with them, and goes all the way to fusion patterns, right? So there's all these effects that can be included. So really realistically, of course, you need that information of your analyze in there. But then, for example, I explained, and you can, using 1D data, you can model analyze, even if you don't know their exact identity. And then there's even an entire research line, both in the States and in Europe, by other groups that go as far as profiling classes of analyze in their characteristics, the chemical characteristics that you even for analyze that hypothetically could exist, could start to make attention. So you could really simulate compound classes and then show this is what you get if you do this. So I'm not saying you shouldn't retrofit, but I think also, management lines in case, blah, 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 right? Economic types are against you, then in favor. It takes so much time to get industry to do this. So for academia and teaching, for sure, retrofits, learn a lot from the industry side. I think we should also use the digital tools that we have nowadays.
So we can either talk about in commercial instrumentation or even if you were to retrofit for either the GCGC side or the LC side. Are there certain hardware components that might be difficult to access or maintain, and that might be a reason why some industries or applications might not be willing to do comprehensive 2D chromatography?
So I think right now I'm going to talk about so one thing that GCGC people have is these nice robust GCGCs that always are able to generate the same GCGC separation, whereas we have a lot more, I would say, attention time shifts, where also right from irregularities cause difference in composition and right, this is LC, so not GC, so also evolution orders can slightly alter or based on get less result. So it's not only a systematic shift, but it's also a non-systematic shift. But the main thing is the color, like a second dimension color, like one time is pressure spikes. Right, what the color of buses, I don't know if you have anything to say about spike, but rotors of the 2DLC valve, like the switching valve, I don't know how many thousand injections, but then you can replace it. There's so many of these components that cause all these irregularities. I would say this is also why one of the reasons why LC is maybe currently fundamentally less attractive, or hardware-wise less attractive. It's amazing manufacturers, but
yeah, that's really interesting to hear about the LC side, because with us on the GCGC side, we kind of can get away with doing as many injections as possible. The only thing you really have to worry about maintaining is like your mass spec on the end, and keeping that nice and clean. But it's, I think, really eye-opening the amount of parts, moving parts that you have in your LC system and how that can really affect things. And so now we're going to kind of break things up for our GCGC community, which the one poll that did work showed that it's primarily GCGC people here. What type of modulators are you currently using? Is there one that might be simpler to use in all applications and industries versus another one?
That's a tough question, which is like one sponsor in the room, but we can like decide, let's say, like for me it's linked to the method development. So basically when like for the column combination, like you can always adjust the modulation, but when you have a GCGC condition that is working on a condenser that is working, like don't try to like fine tune it and adjust it, because like you like spend time, it would be nice, but maybe after like you use comparability, it's like very different. So regardless what you have as a problem, like just find like your optimal like condition for that, and only play when it's like really need to be adjusted. So After we can discuss that which one is easier to adjust that one. Now we have both kind of modulators and flow modulators. I think the kind ones is to optimize. As I want to say, the kind is easy to optimize. You plug them in, comes in, and they work immediately. The flow ones are a bit more difficult to optimize, but once they work, that's everything you have to do. You work a lot of components. So the kind ones need a lot of technology. At some point, people get annoyed, a couple of days walk downstairs, and it's a massive sharing of technology. So then that's the thing that you have to make easy optimization, but high cost and use or more difficult optimization in low modulator. Then it works with the system.
Yeah, and I believe it's a similar thing for the LC community here. There's different types of modulators. I know we heard a lot about the active solvent modulation technique today, but is there one that may be easier for online comprehensive 2D LC or the simplest for a non-expert user?
I'm going to follow the lead of Pierre-Luc Stéphane here. I'm not going to say which is my favorite, but well, in 2DLC we have several types of switching valve interface, and 6 port to position, 10 port to position, and so on. In my opinion, they are more or less the same in terms of performances. I will maybe answer by saying that there are basically 2 things that you have to be very careful about. First of all, is that the flow path for the 2 positions is the same. It needs to be the same. And second of all, is that if you're using multiple valves, they need to be synchronous. Yeah, because otherwise you might end up with a lot of retention time shift and stuff like that in the second dimension, which might complicate like your data visualization and interpretation. Well, that's.
Sorry, we're kind of just staring down the 2 other LC experts. And then also going along with the LC lines, how could a non-expert user also ensure that there's minimization of like your extra column volumes and dwell volumes as well?
Well, in terms of performance, it's true that you have to be careful that your instrument is robust, but you also have to make sure that each part of your instrument give the best possible results. So in second dimension, especially, extra column volumes and dwell volumes are very impactful. Because first of all, the second dimension runtime is usually very short. So anything in terms of extra volume, extra dwell volume will add up to the cycle time and will reduce your effective gradient time, the effective analysis time that you have for your separation. So this is something that you have to be extra careful about from the pump to the detector, in my opinion, and people often overlook that. For example, in the second dimension, I tend to favor binary pumps over quaternary pumps to reduce as much as possible the dwell volumes. Predators, you can use ultra-low dispersion predators. You also have UV cells with lower volumes. Of course, then you need to be careful because you can lose sensitivity. It depends on what you're looking for. And anything in terms of capillary and tubing, there's a lot of effort that you can make, in my opinion, and that can really make a difference in your final separation in the second dimension and hence in the overall result in terms of capacity, especially.
Then I would just add that we kind of talked about retrofitting before and hardware laying around, but if you're going to spend money on a TLC system, the instrumentation pump is a good place to spend it, because the modern, I would say, last 10 years era of LC pump technology is much better than the previous era, especially as Soraya said, in terms of the characteristics that are really important in the second mention. So buy a modern one. And as far as the extra complex, I mean, I think there's, again, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of work by a number of groups really looking at the effect of all of the pieces of the flow path. So the tubing, the detector cell, and things like this on the overall performance. I mean, we just know a lot more than 10 years ago. So I guess go read the literature on that particular topic because the new stuff is really valuable. And you will find some free web-based calculators. You know, those are good resources.
A little bit of a free promo for the simulators. So moving forward, I think then we also want to try to focus now on the back end of a comprehensive 2D system and looking at the detectors. Are some detectors easier to maintain than others? As obviously, there's also more information that's gained from others. So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages that you currently see with some comprehensive 2D systems in their detectors?
We were actually, I kind of wanted to say something earlier when we were talking about when Hunter said we always do 2D first. I guess I'm curious. Is mass spec a prerequisite for that idea? That is, so if you're advocating for always doing 2D first, is that with mass spec necessarily or not? So you would actually prefer to do it by the first?
Yeah, that depends on the amount of information that I have. So if I know really nothing about the system, I would go for FID. Not because it's more like for saving the master than would be like in the kind of FID. But to be honest, like as soon as I have like minimum information about the sample, I go straight to the master. Like even if I start like the way we started with petroleum, so just like reduce it a lot and split it a lot and see what's happening there.
So I guess the reason I ask is I think for us, it really depends on the situation because, I mean, we more or less, I would say, don't have an equivalent to the FID. So, you know, what the right, sort of the right detector is at that moment when you are person kind of really say what it is, because if I had a choice, I use a detector every day, all the time. But there's some things I won't see that way. And in that case, then I have to go to mass spec or some other technique. I mean, there's a lot of certain other things that won't see that way. So I can miss, you know, the entire sample. In fact, it really depends.
I'm Cain and I complain about gases a lot. If you happen to me complain about the price of gases, you will probably at some point. But it's the first time recently that I stopped running because we have a dual detection with the quadruple and FID. But for projects now where I just want the MS and not using my FID because it's too expensive to run it. So it's not just helium. For us, it's gotten really expensive. It's everything. So it's a consideration I
hadn't really thought of before until recently, just in terms of which detector I prefer to use.
So I would like to just add a little bit to what Dwight also said, and also what I see on the last part of the questions of advantages, disadvantages. I think an additional thing to take into account for 2D LCDs is that our prompts are sometimes caused by the detector. These we have to, of course, we often protect the detector. And right, the second dimension is the routing or analyzing more. So earlier people would develop all this modulation stuff and such in order to solve mainly solve the compatibility. But now we have, of course, also that the intention, right, especially with the mass spec there, that the second dimension causes mass spec to have to look more carefully, right, and survive to find something because it got a little more. Which is why you also get to space things like, column to trap stuff and such, and of course also ASM that really helps. So just mentioning it now because right, the detector really matters there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's always like whenever you get the samples dropped off to you, it's what and how much is in there. And so what we usually do is, what I like that we've seen a lot too is the splitting of two FID because you get a lot of quantitative data from the FID, it's almost universal, and then you can sort of what kind of compounds. So sorry about the price of the gas, but I like to use it both.
Just a follow-up question on the detector for XC. So because on the matrix, I have the feeling that we have also an easier life on our side because for us it's like EI, you're going to get to the top. Like what's like the most like commonly like used on the NS side with like electrospread of like positive mode and it's for the rest of.
Yeah, electrospread is the most common by far, no question. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times that I didn't have these electrospread in my life. It's for very specific purposes. As far as the mass analyzer goes, it really depends on the application. So, against molecules and quadrupoles, good I would say because it's fast, especially the new ones, super fast. But if you have any sort of biomolecule, so like you'll have singly charged ions, almost always. For dealing with peptides and proteins, pretty much need to talk about.
And so then lastly, on the topic of instrumentation and hardware, everyone's favorite thing, is there a way that maybe we can try to make troubleshooting sometimes easier for non-expert users? It can be a little intimidating with all the different components that you have going on, especially as we've heard about in the LC system. If something breaks down, kind of where do you start in the troubleshooting process?
If they're not able to troubleshoot a 1D system, send them back to school to learn. We had colleagues or people going to work in a lab and help them set stuff up, and here comes this guy running with epoxy that fixes leaking things in system and going, listen, but if people don't know how, if they don't have enough knowledge to troubleshoot a 1D system, then you go ahead and get started there. It's a big game. Plus the pressure is the good side. About the pressure purposely. So this after very low. Yeah.
I think the challenge is, well, one of the big challenges is there's just so many more ways that things can go wrong. So, that people in a certain context, people suggesting, yeah, you should write something about troubleshooting for TLC. It's like, okay, but where do I start exactly? Because, I mean, the number of times that I have the same problem, very small. It's usually some quite different problem. So you could write for a very long time about all kinds of problems. So I mean, it's I think it's a difficult one. It's a challenge. It's, at least for us, very much dependent on experience. Very difficult to replace that currently.
And all of this stuff today, but yeah, I also think so I also think like troubleshooting is also about like education and like sharing knowledge. So I agree with why it's difficult to do because like every situation is kind of different. But I think like even like classes like Peter mentioned Keynote where I can like the possibility for students to dismantle like a whole financial, so they say, oh, my filament is broken, but I know basically like what I will see when I will open like the top of the iron source and like what I can do. I think it's really important. And I think there is also a part about like hardware development. Like a good example in GCxGC, you have like moving from glass firstly to micro-conductor, so metal connection in the column. So I think like when it came out, like I don't know if people in the room still have like glass press that will be open, but we don't, like, because we find a way to make a big problem disappear or almost disappear by finding a better like, piece of hardware.
Yeah, I agree with the education piece, but I also would say don't beat yourself up for too long. Reach out to the vendors because, especially with issues like these, we've probably seen it, right? So, no point in continuing that it's the best.
Well, Joe, that's a very broad question. We have two potential, not our company, but two potential companies integrated right. There are way more rules once they get the instrument, what they could do if they do something they never seen before. And these are companies like California Department companies working with one dimension 30, 40 years. And so if you're not expert in GCxGC, we talk about that the only way how to troubleshoot is to first reach to the weapon. And then if the weapon never sees the problem, like the happened to us twice already, get only reach to the other expert that we know, right? So we are thinking how can we make a little bit like more wide. And this is still like unofficial, but we're thinking that maybe we can create like a discussion forum where all like GCxGC experts are live. And it might be also a discussion forum that needs to be separated by GCxGC or TMM, whatever you know you decide to separate it into. And whenever there's like a new question from someone, like you can chip in and answer because if we were in troubleshooting things that's like before and no one ever talked to before, we haven't solved them before we come to cloud. But now we have like experience, and if you really have experience, then the only way you can do it is to really talk to someone else and hope that they will answer. Yeah.
So just speaking from personal experience, because I was relatively new to separation sciences, and coming from forensic and predominantly biology background, I had to transition from not doing anything into separation sciences. And so I'm in the old school route looking up Reddit. That was quite helpful. So this is something that came to really early on. And having been with experts, I thought if there was a and just adding to the two items. If there was a portal and you have actually any problem in your lab, regardless of what instrument you're using, if there's a problem, then you just describe it and a student actually upload a video, two-minute video describing the problem and a solution. And if you have access to it, that would be quite helpful. And you wouldn't have to rely on Reddit, which is mostly on GCMS and not to images. So if you could set up something like that, that would be really helpful. Just pitching that to the experts.
I would add my support to that idea. I was actually for years comment, like if we could, as a community, identify sort of a prioritized list of here are the things that we want to develop knowledge around. I think that'd be a really great community effort. But some sort of discussion group, maybe my only hesitation about that is I think the discussion comes and goes. And it would be great to have a resource that's more long living. CGC magazine is an unbelievable resource, 35 years, whatever it's been, that, you know, you can still go look at articles from 20 years ago. So that, you know, that could be a place to begin, not necessarily the only place, but I think some sort of organized maybe would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's like a really interesting idea. It's like you actually have some sort of like longer living, like you said, Dwight, resource for people to not only try to look up to see if their answer, you know, if their problem has been seen before, but even if it hasn't, still have that form aspect as well, so that they could ask and people could always go and reference and check. Oh yeah.
Also, speaking from personal experience, I did most of my initial data collection on the 20-year-old instrument, and the processes for like changing out filaments or a lot of the different maintenance was a lot more involved, even like venting than now with like the PT4D. So, you know, having also a form that can help with people who are working with older instruments that the troubleshooting isn't exactly the same as it is now could be really helpful.
Yeah, this was really great. I think we kind of figured out something that we need to work on as a community. So now we're going to kind of go into the method development side, which we kind of touched on already a little bit. And so kind of the first thing being, are there any main concerns? I think we've already kind of talked about this, towards method development and comprehensive 2D chromatography and its complexity. If anyone else has anything to add to that?
So since we, most of the time, we need to build a classification, so we always are hesitant to change the method we have because we know it's going to cost us a lot of cost once we do that. So I think that's very similar to what Jane said. If we can develop it a little bit better, like it's not going to bring us, you know, such like a better separation, such a better result. So we can do that because we just want to keep the classification together and not spend hours and hours building it.
And then this one's definitely going to be important discussion. How transferable have you experienced methods from 1D to 2D being in terms of controlling gradients, the columns, etc.? Has anyone tried to transfer a 1D method to a 2D method? That might probably is a better question. No. Oh.
Yeah, but at least in our group, like, I think we are past, like, transferable methods, because, as you mentioned before, like, we start to be and basic conditioning to so it's more like adapting what we already do in this dimension like chromatography to a potential new sample that will like going like back from a 1D method, because we know that we really like what is slower on the ramp, we like have like different like acquisition rates on the mass spec, so there is like no real like need to say, okay, I would like see for my 1D what I can bring into the and just like start to go to the and see if it needs to be adjusted or not.
Can you just move forward? Does anyone have any input on, for a non-expert user, how they can kind of try to optimize the parameters involved in a GCGC method, such as, you know, is there a go-to separation mechanism on 1D and 2D that you like, certain column dimensions, and also flow versus thermal modulation? What's kind of like your go-to first initial method? Yeah.
Here, like for GCGC, like the question is like how many samples do you want to analyze? Like do you have 2 samples? So because yeah, like there is probably like no need to make like GCGC injection if you want just to have like 2 sample analysis. But after like if you want to run like a meta-analysis project where you have like 500 samples, like that's all the time you have to like really optimize exactly the sample prep like before your method to make sure that you will make the life of the instrument easier on the long term, because what you want is stability over like months. But if you have like 2 samples and then you see that good enough, I would say like, don't to yourself up and find it.
One of the things is sitting on column for a second, and we could have answered this years ago. But even this morning, I saw one of the slides out of it that we're using a really narrow for column second. You have a much easier life if you keep the same diameter as the first and second for your columns. Things work out a lot better for a variety of reasons that I'm sure you could go on for hours. Yeah, so I think one of the problems that we're having is people looking at, you know, oh, here's this method from 11, 12 years ago, it's been cited a bunch of times. All these happen, but they don't realize that people now move to a slightly different column configuration. People using 0.25 or whatever or something like that. We did a lot of mistakes early on. I think we're fucking around. I think you can't really, you know, it's hard to tell people don't do that. It's better.
Just going to comment that we do have a tool, free tool that's called simply GCxGC. So if you haven't checked that out, there is a workflow that it takes a look at the method and walks you through a conversion, and then does give you kind of a progression as you're trying to build, you know, either better resolution in the first dimension or in the second dimension. It gives you options of, you know, reducing the idea of second column in certain instances for really more plates and things like that. So pretty complete tool for checking out.
I'd say that probably our lab has a go-to system of, for the separation mechanisms, we try to typically do a reverse column configuration. So kind of having that polar on the first D and then the non-polar on the second D. So that way, we especially like it for fuel analysis. So that way you get the nice alkene band on top, then the cycloalkanes in the middle and the aromatics on the bottom. So that kind of tends to be our go-to separation mechanisms.
Als je zegt, we talk about it for hours, the famous spaghetti graph that you have today, I will have also is the second dimension form. So the ability to control the temperature of the second column independently. We usually take a slightly thicker film column in the second dimension, but there's a lot of movement to play with the column temperature. That really has to make life easier, give you more opportunities for optimization.
Now it's going to be a similar question for the LC crowd as well. What type of parameters do you kind of look for if you're trying to optimize an LC method? Your stationary mobile phases, your flow rates, or even like looking at the interface parameters. I'll skip that to you so that way you can.
Okay, in this case, so from my point of view, there are mainly two steps in method development in case of 2DLC. The first one is very important. You have to find orthogonal conditions for your specific separation, and it's actually quite lengthy because, as Dwight Stoll said, there's a lot of different stationary phases out there, different mobile phases, pH that you can use. You can also tweak the temperatures and so on. So it can be quite lengthy, and ultimately it's very sample dependent. So it has to be done every time you are analyzing a new sample, basically. As to how you optimize those kind of thermodynamic parameters, it depends, but usually you have to screen different conditions the old-fashioned way, different tolerance with different mobile phases and pH, and you have to try those different conditions and maybe plot retention diagrams to figure out which are even the best orthogonality for your target application. For the kinetic parameters, this is also quite difficult because in 2DLC there are a lot of parameters to take into account. You have the parameters from the first dimension, flow rate, gradient conditions, and so on. You also have the same in the second dimension, and you also have interface parameters, the sampling rate, do you split the flow between dimensions or not? And all of these have to be taken into account as a whole. You cannot just optimize separately the first dimension and then the second dimension and then try to combine everything. It's a comprehensive method, just not in its name, but also in its approach. So to do that, it can be quite difficult because all those parameters are also interrelated and they affect differently the metrics of performance that are peak capacity, peak intensity. So they are, in my opinion, it's very difficult to optimize separately all those parameters. So you need specific tools. Every groups kind of develop their own tools. They mostly rely on predictive calculations and also sometimes, for example, Pareto optimality approach in order to determine the best set of conditions for a given analysis time. So I don't know about the other 2DLC users' experience. That's my personal experience for method development and optimization in 2DLC.
Because I'll see people in terms of like, if you want to ESI at the end and to deal with the sensitivity issues of flow rate, ASI, how does that affect your method development? high information is not straightforward.
So I think, I would agree with everything Soraya said, but I think it also depends on, it really greatly depends on the application. So to summarize, time and cost. In the comprehensive case study, I would say my group, we really focus on the second dimension to start and kind of get to the good enough point there, and then adapt everything else to that. So whatever those conditions are, go with to get to good enough. And then we basically work backwards and figure out what the base condition need to be, what needs to happen in the first condition. That's what we kind of started from scratch. And right now in the pharmaceutical industry, there's a large subset of applications where the mindset is, I have a 1D separation. And I see a peak that I didn't see for the last 4 years. And I want to know what it is. And in that context, they don't want to mess with them. They don't want to change anything about it. They want that peak right there. So you leave everything alone, and you basically adapt the interface in the second dimension to interrogate that interface. So those are completely different mindsets. So I think it really can really strongly depends on what you're trying to do. To get your question, Tim, so you know, each group has their preferences. Kind of our good enough condition today for comprehensive work is typically a flow rate of 2 milliliters per minute in the second dimension, give or take 0.5 milliliters per minute. And so then we usually, for electric pressure, we usually try to get down to 500 microliters per minute by splitting. So we throw away, you know, for 2, we throw away 75% of flow and mass. But if we are interested in squeezing a little more sensitivity out, then we would change our conditions to drop the flow rate down so we don't throw away so much. So I like thinking about it as a kind of a pyramid or a triangle where the vertices of the polygon are, you know, speed, sensitivity, robustness, things like this. You can't have it all. So we sort of think about what of those things do I want to prioritize, and then adjust the conditions to meet my objective. But yes, we have to deal with all this. That's what we do.
So this kind of gets into a lot of our conversations on when is good enough, basically good enough. So how much emphasis does maybe your lab or should a non-expert user really place on method optimization, or should maybe a non-expert user just kind of focus on having a standard method that's fit for purpose or almost every purpose?
Like with the ASTM methods that are being developed now for fuels and other testing labs, should further ASTM methods be developed for other kinds of applications beyond fuels? The kinds of things that might fit from your standard method.
Tomorrow I'm going to talk about the ASTM method, post-salad method. Again, for the petroleum industry, the standardized method is important. And in this case, it's new, for us, a new technology, difficult to adapt. It seems complex. And that's why I started ASTM, because they allow you to start like a low level and later. But for, I think for petroleum, there's always so much money when cargoes from a ship are sold to another party, both parties will do the analysis. If there's kind of a different expectation of quality, there's always a lot of money involved. So in this case, I would say for petroleum, standardizing methods, complete with CRMs in a certified reference material to make sure everybody does it well. I think that then the industry will adopt it. It's very important.
So speaking for myself, a standard method that is fit for purpose, for almost every purpose, I just can't imagine that in the else will. But then also method optimization, I don't really know that was back down to tools what I said in my presentation was often. When those method developments move into method optimization. Yeah, I don't know, but I wish I knew or that I had some way to answer that question because basically the people in Amsterdam have like this huge AI department, like all mathematicians. When I asked them to help us like with method development or optimization problem that we have, then they always tell me, okay, so what do you want? I cannot answer the question. I cannot specifically say that always we want it in a certain way. I think that's basically the bottleneck because there's so many different say blah blah right, so many different things that you could tweak. I don't know what you know, but for sure you have to optimize your development.
All right, so now, also in the interest of timing as well, we're going to try to quickly go through a little bit about what may be some barriers in data processing and analysis and visualization. Hopefully. So I think this got to a comment that we had earlier about in the petroleum industry, but a lot of people are kind of used to, they know what a 1D chromatogram looks like, and then we show them the 2D chromatogram, and they're like, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? So is it the structure of the 2D chromatogram or even like the overall data set when you start adding in also a multivariate detector on there that makes it maybe not interpretable for non-expert users? Or is there a way that we can try to show and highlight in that 2D chromatogram the powerful insights that are gained and also the patterns that you get from that chromatogram?
For example, maybe the compound classes could be incorporated into like the method analysis on the HCM or an FID just or so standard you could look at something and get a gauge of whether or not they have a gasoline or maybe or their kerosene has the wrong cut or other such things.
Yeah, I think like the key word is like non-expert user because it depends to who you are talking to. So we are speaking about the petroleum industry. When they are used to see like one chromatographs and like motions and that appears or disappear, like, they might be lost. But if you take like really someone like outside of separation science and you want to see in your sample A you have like all these peaks and in sample B these compounds disappear, it's easier to communicate over to the like chromatograph image because like it's like a key stage, like find the difference between the two. So they can understand, okay, I look at the exact same position and the peak is not there anymore, so this is like one of the difference between my sample. But if the person are not used to separation, that depends on the background, they are like really like out of the field, I think it's easier to communicate like a chromatograph.
I actually am starting to believe that maybe it's not true. I also thought this for a really long time. I was spotting the difference, but we're starting to collect some data on what people actually see. And so far, it's not really indicating that people are better at doing that job on GCxGC plots. So it's kind of interesting. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think we think it's easier, but I think it's still really a fundamental question of, is it easier or not? Yeah, and images, like photographs.
And I actually think that this is the power of the comprehensive technique, that we have structured command that make the interpretation much easier. And in many applications, it allows us to don't use analysis because we know so well how the peaks are separated that we don't need the analysis. And this is a strength for many applications. Of course, it's not true for all the applications. It depends what you're looking at, how much you have confidence with the example that you are analyzing. But to make an example that is perfectly fitting to understand the structure of the phase analysis. Very often you have IPs that are limited there, and if you're in one thing, you may doubt. Is a strange thing that is limited there? It's someone that is not in my standard issue, or it's something else. If you are running a GCxGC, you have not the ball, so you know straight away that it's an IP and not a structure. So I think it's easy to communicate and explain the structure.
To say something similar, and also the complexity of the sample, the direct accuracy, that there is much more compound that you are expecting from one. This is something what never use it. It's first impression that it's really in one area, so it's very powerful.
Again, putting this in forensic context and taking only mention, like we don't use two-dimensional chromatography. And a true example of non-expert would be the jury and the judges in the courtroom. And it would take a whole crash course to explain then what GC is and then what a GCxGC is to. Yeah, that's going to be a task.
I think that's really interesting that, you've done research and kind of looking at, trying to see, like, spot the differences and really that easy of a way maybe to communicate the patterns that you're seeing in the 2D chromatogram. And so maybe along with kind of creating like that form or that long-term method, or sorry, long-term piece of document that goes along with the troubleshooting, maybe as a community, we can also try to have some way to show like the patterns that you would see in the 2D chromatograms with some examples and really explaining the structure of it. So that way a non-expert user could try to maybe better spot the differences in between two chromatograms. I also do want to point out that I believe it's close to 5:30 and at the end of the day and everything. We didn't get to all the slides, but I think we had really great, fruitful conversations as a community and really also merging the GCxGC and LC worlds together. With that, I think